I'll be honest. Like I find the off-air stuff way more engaging and way more hilarious than the on-air stuff. And so I think
it means a lot to you, though. You know?
Yeah, I know. Maybe I think that like people would potentially appreciate like an off-air podcast where it's just like shenanigans and goofs and like you're not trying to be super productive. It's like it's a spoof.
So I like to think that all the time, because then I'm like, oh, I'm motivated to do something because I can do whatever I want to do. And then I realize people are coming here because they want to talk about fitness and they've done a lot of fitness. Yeah. Like, I don't need to tell you, oh, well, when you're an old lady, you've got to train a different way.
But people might want to hear about the pens that you're making.
That's true.
I hope they do.
I do.
I hope that is going to be my solution.
Where did you even think to come up with that?
I just cleaned them up and I was going to show you all the crap. But so there's like, I got really into metal made like on a CNC lathe pens. And then I got really into fountain pens and then I bought a bunch.
This is because Lance just, he has so much free time. And
so I got, these are like,
I have no idea what you're holding up to your camera right now. Okay. Oh, okay. I got it.
Yeah.
That looks like Trump
rookie pen. For a second.
Wow. And those are pretty dope. And then I made one. I was like, well, so this would be great if I could just make some. And so I made one. And it kind of fits. It writes. It's okay. It's a little leaky. You see, this is supposed to be the same color, but it's got leaks all over it. The threads are a little loose. Like we said, machine tolerances can be really important, even though those numbers seem imperceptibly small.
Yeah.
Damn, I didn't even know that was a hobby.
It's cool.
It's funny. I just recently got into reading and writing. Maybe eventually I'll get into pens. It's the gateway.
Take the next step. I'll be there to hold your hand.
Yeah, awesome. Look forward to.
How's the reading going?
It's hard, man.
I'm frustrated.
A lot of these books don't even have pictures. It's like, how people do this stuff. It's a lot for a guy like me.
On that note, we're going to talk about sprinting today. And we're going to be talking about, for the people in the crowd who would like to get back into doing more sprinting in your training, right? I think we can all agree to some level. Most of us, I won't say all of us, I think all of us can agree to some level that sprinting is important. Your capacity to sprint probably matters as a human, unless, like, depending on the goal here, right? But I think for the average person that we're talking to and dealing with, if you listen to this podcast, you're probably interested in being a pretty well-rounded total package type athlete and human. And sprinting, I think, is an important aspect of that. And so I'd imagine that there are going to be a lot of people listening who's like, I would like to have more sprinting in my training. I would like to bring that back in one way or another, but like I haven't really been doing it. I've been doing more strength, more hypertrophy, more like powerlifting, bodybuilding, maybe Olympic lifting. Like you're coming from a different background where you just haven't really been sprinting. So I want to go over some best practices to bring sprinting back into your training successfully. So you're not the person who does it for a week and then blows both of your hamstrings and it's like, fuck this, I'm never doing it again. And then does it again and makes the same mistake and then reblows both of your hamstrings like 3 months later. And so I think maybe the best place to start here is going to be on just like the basic concept, like a load volume spike in this, right? I think the biggest mistake you can make is going from having not sprinted to then being like, no, I'm just going to go out to the field and I'm going to go run some like 40s, 60s, 100s, open it up today, like 8 to 10 reps and just like see how this thing goes. That's a horrendous idea. Please don't do that. Okay. When we're getting back into sprinting, and we'll pass this around here in a second, in my mind, the best place to start we need to start you with acceleration-based protocols. And the reason for this is because things like falling starts or push-up starts or things where you're going to be going for 10 to 15 yards and we have a little bit of a body lean because we're not going to put so much emphasis and stress on a hamstring in that position. It's much harder to blow a hamstring with acceleration than it is to blow a hamstring when you're standing up tall, full-fledged, like fly sprinting. So to start building some of that tolerance for you again, I really like doing like 10, 15 yard acceleration work coming from different stances and positions. Let me kind of like pass that around. Maybe I'll throw this to Ryan Patrick first and see, in your mind, because you tend to manage more of like our people that really like to sprint. When you're thinking about bringing people back into sprinting, where are you looking at kind of starting them in this realm?
There's a few things. So first of all, I'm looking at just, what are the fitness aptitudes that they're missing, having spent so much time in the weight room. So if you just look at it from a load and velocity perspective, they're not accustomed to, these high velocity, low load scenarios because we've got weight on. And I have this conversation a lot with athletes too. It's, at some point there starts to be a divergence of what you do in the weight room versus what needs to happen in a sprint. And basically, you guys know the stronger you get or the more weight you're lifting, the slower things move, the more time you have. And the requirements from, a connective tissue perspective are very, very different when you're on the field, because the faster you get, the less time you have to produce these high forces. So we have this collapsing window on the field versus something that can potentially expand when you've got a bar on your back. So I agree with all the acceleration work. I even think that resisted accelerations are really, really ideal because they're going to allow athletes to find the proper orientation of force. It actually slows them down and gives them more time to cycle through this sprint cycle. So again, you kind of ease them in. Now, if you don't have access to a sled or a 1080 or an Exergini, I think a hill sprint is a really great place to start as well, because you're going to be in that, acceleration posture. It's going to buy you time. You don't have to worry about high velocity demands, which really expose the hamstring to maybe forces or positions that it's not ready to tolerate. And then I have to look, with the meat monkeys too, it's when you get really good at lifting, one of the best strategies is to not move or rotate under load. And when you're sprinting, you really need that. So most guys transitioning back to the turf have about zero internal rotation. And so when we're trying to do high velocity hip flexion, we're trying to create some separation between the shoulders. You'll see a lot of these guys almost like flap to the side because they're running into their end ranges very, very quickly. So we have to start to recapture some of those ranges of motion as well. And I think, again, using some of the resistance training some of the resisted sprinting allows us to slow things down, allows our athletes to feel the ground, to feel themselves opening up without, the danger that comes with the velocity. So those are the places that I really like to start. I also really like a high volume of low intensity plyometrics. So this could be, if you're looking at like the plus plyos, which are gaining a lot of popularity, it's the light tier, or, Joel Jamieson did the aerobic plyometrics back in the day. I think those are just infinitely valuable because the Achilles, the elasticity through the shank is just not something that is trained in a weight room. And athletes need to get back to that because most of the guys that we work with who are in the weight room, they have a decent amount of muscle mass. They need to be able to absorb and attenuate those forces as they're running, or they're going to get too much yielding. They're not going to be able to adequately transfer force into the ground. So it doesn't have to be hard. And my encouragement to most guys is make it intentionally easy, make it look bouncy. And, within 4 to 6 weeks, I think people can make pretty significant strides in terms of their ability to start to, sprint again. And over time, kind of circling back to your original point, James, I think the short to long approach is just the absolute way to go for a lifting athlete who wants to transition back to the field.
Yeah, in total agreement there. I was going to ask, what is this internal rotation that you speak of? Because I would love to know what that actually looks and feels like.
I'm still recovering meathead, so I have no idea.
Who needs internal rotation? What is this? What is this? This like mythical thing that you speak of. All right, Kieran, let's throw it to you here. Anything to add to, I think, what Ryan laid out, which I thought was very good?
Yeah, those are definitely the big things that I'm always considering with somebody first trying to get back into that. I would probably, the only thing I would add on top of that would probably be, I really like to start people with the mock series or any of the A series from there. So you have like your marches, your snap skips, your switches, double switches, and then eventually like your A skips, A runs. Just to kind of teach like the postural concepts, start to introduce some of the elasticity with like some extensive work that Ryan was talking about. Honestly, just getting the rhythm and coordination. It's amazing how many people will go right arm, right leg, left arm, left leg, and that doesn't feel weird to you? All right, keep going. Yeah,
that's real big at Google.
Sure. Mr. Ipsilateral.
Love them.
So I think that's a really
ipsilateral sprinting.
Sometimes I'll be like, all right, get on the line and run as fast as you can, just like that, and then see what happens. But I think that even going to like their A runs where that might be a little more aggressive for some people, like working in first gear, second gear, third gear of like, let's just do step over the ankle. Now let's step over the calf. Now let's go full, whatever third gear means for you. And just kind of progressing the intensity that way. I really like to do that tethered sometimes, just banding them up against like a pillar or something, just so they can find striking the ground and getting some vertical impulse, right underneath them, as opposed to what we're always talking about with like trying to avoid the overstriding. And sometimes just the constraint of the band will help with posture and slowing them down enough to kind of feel themselves in space and then opening it up. I'll do that with people returning from injury. Actually, so in the training team, we have an athlete over in Germany that I'm working with who is a police officer. And we've added some of this over the last probably month and a half, 2 months on top of his normal program. And she sends me a message. She goes, "Hey, good news, bad news. Good news is the sprinting has worked really well. I ran down a perp the other day. Bad news, when I jumped to tackle him, I actually blew out my calf. So now we basically just revisited the beginning with his return to play and started with just accumulating a bunch of volume with the A series and then eventually going up to shorter accelerations. But yeah, so that just adding in the A series on top of what Ryan said, I think is a great starting place for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would say that one, I'm really disappointed that didn't make its way into the team forum. Because I would have, I'm like, bro, like, give me some video. I want to see a video of you running some dude down. Like, that is a Flex Friday for sure. That's the greatest Flex Friday of all time. I want to see you run this dude down, jump, and just pile drive him.
He's a bad dude on the low. You'd have to kind of pull it out of him, but he's a bad dude.
Oh man, that's like, okay. Quick side story here. So in high school playing football, one of our assistant coaches, he was a running back coach. He'd been a running back for the Patriots. He's probably like 5'10", 230, just thick and like outrageously fast and explosive. And so he left the Patriots, ended up becoming a cop. And so he would do his cop work all day and then come to practice with us. And so one day he shows up and he's just like a little disgruntled, like, "Coach, what's up?" He's like, we had like a call today. There was a high school kid that was trying to like shoplift and steal stuff from the store. So we go over there, like we find him and just like standing here, just like got him up against the wall, just like looking at him like, "Hey, stand here. Like, I'm going to talk to my partner. Just don't go anywhere, please." So he's like, I turn to talk to my partner and I'm like, "Please don't run. Please don't run. Please don't run." Sure enough, like, this kid takes off. And like, little does this child know that he's about to get run down by a literally ex-NFL running back. He was like, it took me about 15 yards to catch him, and I enjoyed tackling him for every single second of it. Imagine the terror. You're like a $175 soaking wet, and you're hauling ass, and you're seeing this 230-pound rhino just like walk you down. No, thank you. Anyways,
no way.
To circle this back to something more relevant, I think like the A skips and the series and things like that, those can almost be like a workout in and of themselves for people. Especially really early on. Like if you have someone who's super stiff, no elasticity, just kind of like that refrigerator that comes walking in, they've done like no sprinting, no jumping, no plyos for a couple of years. Like your whole workout may just be working through like those A series and those skips and all that, because that prep in and of itself is going to help us start to like increase a little bit of cycle time, start building up that tendon, ligament, and joint health, and like preparing you for the work to come. So I really think in sprinting, the biggest mistake people make is just not adequately assessing like where they are now and what they need to start with. Because they think back to when they were in high school and you never had to warm up and you could go just like all out, open up, and there were no problems. That's just not simply the case anymore. And so let me punt this around here to you, Lance, and see.
Sure.
Because I know like at your time at iFast, obviously a lot of athletes coming in, and then the time at Google seeing potentially probably the other far end of that spectrum. What are some of the thoughts that you have in this realm of bringing people back into sprinting successfully? So it's a good exposure and experience for them.
So first, quick shout out to Tyler Terrell, because I can't stop thinking about him.
He's the man.
Not just because I like him, but because he's really good at all this stuff.
He's been on the podcast twice, so people go look that up. Both episodes were gold.
Definitely look that up. He's a great speaker too. I can't recommend him enough. He's one of the best coaches I've ever worked with. Maybe the best, actually. So I didn't realize how much he taught me, because I didn't. Normally I would rehab his broken athletes, and then he would help them. I would help them return to play or whatever, or do whatever thing that they couldn't do. I would help him with that stuff. I think it's important that if you do want to sprint and you see video of yourself and you're like, something's wrong there. Like maybe you look like a penguin running, like you guys were talking about. What did Brian? I think you said flapping. That was a great one. Yeah. So if you see something like that, like it's okay to not try to fix that while sprinting. Like I kind of want you to be a little hindbrain when you're sprinting. And you might need just some dedicated unilateral exercises that, maybe you haven't done before. You might need some endurance work, like really high rep stuff, like 25 rep calf raises or something like that is maybe the lowest level that you could start with. At that point, I would probably say try to just jump rope for 5 minutes and good luck. Take breaks when you need to, but you'll start to condition those tissues. If you've never done any of it, it's not a bad idea to throw it in every day or into your warm-ups. I try to put a very little bit at the end of everyone's warm-up. Most of my people are not pushing me about sprinting too much. And, honestly, if I'm training you in person and I ask you to march and you bring contralateral knee and elbow together, I'm calling that a win. Like that is great. So, you've got to try to be as objective as possible when you're evaluating yourself, because it's really easy to say, well, I used to bench 425 in high school or whatever. So now I should probably just work up to that today. I'll go slow though. If you haven't done it, you're not going to be able to do it, or you're going to get injured. And that is more true for if you went and you tried to do a weight that you couldn't lift, you probably just wouldn't get it. You could die, I suppose, depending on the exercise, but you probably won't, right? You'll know before then that, hey, this is outside my realm. But with sprinting, you probably won't until it's too late. So the other cue that I've seen that I have found helpful is if you're the type of person who likes to try really hard, like puts a lot of effort forth, giving it 80% effort instead of 100% effort will be tremendous for keeping the parts of your body loose that need to stay loose to do sprinting, and then still kind of like keeping up speed. I think this was a Charlie Francis thing, and that's where I got it from. But he would always say, like, your numbers, you will be faster at 80% effort than you will at 100, because at 100 you're fighting yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, do less, right? This is just forgetting Sarah Marshall 101. You just got to do a little bit less. You see the people go to sprint and it's just like every muscle in their body is contracted and it's just like, and I'm just like, bro, chill the fuck out. Like, we're not trying to deadlift 600 pounds here. Like, we don't need that much stiffness and rigidity. Like, you got to have a little bit of flow to you right now. Go ahead.
And I have one thing to add, because Ryan, you brought up the internal rotation. I have a question for you, because I don't work with a lot of people working on sprinting. and I've worked more with like multi-directional stuff. And I can see you needing like internal rotation in your hip and shoulder and is really important, but more so important when you're a multi-directional sport athlete, when you have to stop and start, and you have these, as Lee Taft calls them, another great one to look up, re-accelerations. Like I'm slowing myself down and then I'm speeding myself back up. When I think of linear sprinting, I think of a lot of people who probably have really dysfunctional breathing patterns and don't have any internal rotation. And that seems pretty normal to me. Is that not quite the case? Or is it more of a, we got to take you from negative 10 degrees of internal rotation to 0 degrees of internal rotation, and then you'll be better?
Yeah. I mean, I think like the old perspective, if you want to say like with the internal rotation, is I think about just your toned up bro, the guy who moves like he's still in the squat rack, just a ton of extensor tone, anterior orientation all day. So hips are rolled forward. It just, the sockets will literally start to face to the side. So when you try to bring them in and do this linear thing, you get this really kind of side to side pattern.
Yeah.
And it's
lots of torque
I don't
through
need
the
them
knee.
to run like Tom Cruise, where it's like perfectly in line. But I want them to have some more range of motion that they can access. And I think you brought up a really good point when you're talking about the hindbrain. Most of the cueing with sprinting is very, very simple, because I will tell the athletes, if you think you're slow, and we still use a lot of sub-maximal sprinting work. I know even for myself, as soon as I try to take off, it's like my neck, you can like see the vein. Like it will be, not that I'm fast, but the camera, it'll be blurry and you'll see a vein in my neck still, because everything is just super tight. So when we set up sprint drills, I really want a simple cue, or I want a constraint that allows them to at least access something that's a little bit better. But I don't know that, because any kind of high velocity or high force contraction, you're still going to have some kind of force that you've got to get into the ground. There's going to be some squeezing. What I think the issue is with a lot of the lifters is that they don't know how to have that relaxation, the kind of strike and relax, so that the leg can start to recover. And so you see this more grinding, you see these longer ground contacts, you see them trying to find more range of motion that maybe they don't have. But one of the things that I see with guys who do lift a lot is they get what I call like the Flintstone Run. So because their range of motion is so short that they want to work hard, they want to feel like they're putting effort. So they get this hurried, they don't create the separation. They're not patient in their putting their force into the ground. It's almost like just this hurried, yabba dabba doo run. Yeah, it sounds like a Stewie from Family Guy running across the room. You just get this little pitter patter of foot contacts.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's sorry, James, go ahead. I know you have something to say.
If you have something, I was going to transition to kind of another related topic here.
So I was just going to throw in also, I think your point, Ryan, about orienting the hip sockets a little bit more forward is huge, right? So if, for the people listening out there, if your hips are rotated outward and you bring your knee up, your knee will have this tendency to turn in. And you've probably seen that described as knee valgus, when the foot is out, but the knee is in. You'll see, I'll see that a lot with the people that I train, but you'll see a lot of that malalignment where the femur bone, the thigh bone is not stacked on the shin bone. And so you got a lot of twists in the knee. And it's not necessarily that you're going to blow out your knee when you're sprinting, though I guess it could happen. But you could do something to the hip. Your back could be persistently tight. And just in general, it's good practice to learn how to drive force through a joint that is compression. On the other end, the above end of what you're saying, this is totally just Poindexter. Like I'm not really working with a bunch of sprinters, but it makes sense to me that it's probably most important to reintroduce a small amount of looseness in the torso. Does that check out?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're rigid the whole time, I mean, it's grinding, it's slow. When I explain this to people, I always use a golf swing. Like, you're going to produce high forces at specific points, but in between the initial backswing and the coming down and hitting of the ball, there needs to be relaxation. There needs to be an element of fluidity. If you look at somebody at the tail end of a 100-meter sprint, the guys who are grinding are falling behind more. The guys who have a certain level of grace and that fluidity, they're having less attenuation of their top end speed, and you usually see them winning.
That's great.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, if you want a great example of what this actually looks like when done well, like just go pull up 40-yard dashes at the combine, and you're gonna see the guys that are really fast. It looks like they're not trying. Like, it looks like they're just generally out for kind of like a casual Sunday run. And it's like, oh, that was a 4.3, that was a 4.4. Are you kidding me? Because they just look super relaxed. It looks super easy. A similar thing at the Olympics. You watch really good 100-meter sprinters, right? Like, just go watch videos of Usain Bolt. Like, that dude is just like so chilled out. And yeah, it's just so easy and casual, and it's just very flow based. So I want to hit just like 3 other things here quickly before we wrap this. One, I would like to just go over like, where does sprinting kind of fit within a program? 2, we'll make some recommendations on volume, and we'll throw a link to a paper that I think will give you some really good starting points on this. And the third thing I want to do is I actually want to bring Mr. Wilson into this conversation, because I want to chat a little bit about, and I texted you this week, where if we're going to think about like, what's the minimum dosage that you probably need on the hypertrophy/strength side to maintain that quality if you want to start bringing sprinting back in, because I think that that's important as well. Because if you're going to bring sprinting back in, you've got to pull back somewhere else. Like, it's a dimmer switch. So I think those are the 3 big things that I would like to hit here quickly, so we can at least give people, I think, a little bit of what they need to be successful here. And so on the layout side of the world, with regards to like, where does sprinting fit? I mean, I think a lot of the acceleration work, and let me start here. I think that a lot of the skips and things that we were talking about earlier, like A skips, B skips, all that stuff, the jump rope, like Lance talked about, that's stuff that can fit really well at the end of a warm up, and you can get exposure to it every single day. I think putting in like acceleration work, resisted acceleration work can work really, really well at the front end of a training day if you still want to go in and lift. But in my mind, like my own personal preference here, I really like breaking off sprinting and having it be like its own day. I've just found that to be a far more successful strategy for folks over time. Is like, hey, like, this is what this day is about. This is what we're focusing on. I'm not sure if you guys kind of found something in agreement with that. Maybe I'll throw it to Kieran and see where your head is at here.
Yeah, for sure. To your point, I've tried to like combine for myself and a couple guys, like, if you have some decent experience with it, your output is going to be so much higher. I think that if I get even a low volume sprint day, I'm pretty cooked by the time I try to like squat or deadlift. So myself, Doug, and Dan Brandy up here in Connecticut have been doing like a dedicated field day. And like, that's been great because we don't have to worry about, we'll do like some stuff in the weight room after, but it's really just about kind of having fun and getting some good speed exposure on the track. Away from the weight room, so you can really focus on keeping the weight room, the sprints. So I definitely like having a dedicated field day outside of that. But in terms of like, if somebody's limited, like a lot of the people that I'm working with are a little more limited with the days they can actually train. I like trying to put it in really early, super, super low volume, like just accumulating like little exposures over time. That way they're not cooked for the weight room. That way we're looking probably at weekly volume more. In my mind, you can't start low enough with somebody who's coming back to that. You can always add more. But if you overcook the chicken, so to speak, you can't take that back. Right. So.
Yeah. Ryan, Patrick, any thoughts there on, maybe blending it into workouts, or if we're really going to focus, give it its own dedicated day?
I will do some of the acceleration stuff because it is a little more force based on a lifting day. But, as I've even gone back through some of the programs I've written, I found that my instinct is to start to take some of the volume away from the weight room because it does. It's such a high stimulus from a CNS perspective. And it's a different sensation of fatigue than maybe lifting to muscular failure for hypertrophy and learning, when you're having a decrement in speed that your CNS is pretty fried. And so one of the other things that, I tend to not do is I won't do sprinting with, max strength. So when we're in those peak periods, they will start to separate. I love the field day that's just by itself. It's such a high stim day that I don't think you're going to get much else. For those who are trying to get out to a track or an open field and you've got more space and there's that urgency or just desire to open up, we always start with like a curvilinear run or curved run because it allows you to open up, but it also is at a much lower velocity. So it just kind of manages the risk, I think, of potential hamstring strain. So just one thing I'd offer on top of that.
Yeah, I think the curve running is fantastic. It's kind of like acceleration. And then when we start to bring somebody up to where they're actually going to be standing tall, more at top speed, like get them on some form of a curve because it forces them to slow down. And that just like a little bit of a tilt makes a really big difference. It's kind of like true linear top end, open up, just flat line. It comes in really late. Like it takes time to get there. So the biggest thing what Kieran said, don't freaking rush this. Like you have time. The worst thing you can do is go in too quick, pop a hamstring, because now we're out multiple weeks at a minimum. Yeah.
James, could you just like quickly explain why that is? Is that the because of the force production? Is that because your leg is potentially out further in front of you? You're more in a lengthened position with that hamstring. Like, what is it about that position that seems to do that?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think one, there's going to be a technical problem for people that haven't been sprinting that go to open back up
too far forward.
And like if I'm going at really high velocities and I have really, really short stretch shortening cycles now, and my muscles trying to like go through this cycle rapidly and my technique's not that great, and like I hit out in front of my body or I have weird stuff going on, it's just like you just have such little room for error, right? Okay. And I also just think like the contraction time for people is so short. Like there's just nothing in a weight room that replicates the time component like Ryan was talking about. Like that time component, like you have such a small shot clock and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as I sprint. And so the fact that this muscle needs to be able to, hit at incredibly high forces that it probably hasn't seen in a long time, stop that force, and then come back up and come back into like flexion as like a hamstring, for example. It's just like, you just kind of overload that muscle and we get this point where it's just like, fuck this, I can't do it. And it'll just like pop on you. I don't know if like Lance or Ryan or Kieran, if you guys have anything that you wanted to add in there.
I really don't. I just think that doing a lot of the high rep stuff is one of the best preventative things that you can do. And I don't know if you're getting muscle belly or muscle tendon injuries, but muscle tendons don't have the same kind of blood supply. So if you get 25 plus rep sets, that's a good way to just like force some blood into that area and start creating an adaptation. However, slowly it is.
Cool. Was that useful? Did that help, dude?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Nice. So let's actually transition this over to you here. And maybe just because if we're going to bring sprinting back, we've got to pull back someplace else. It's like you probably can't keep your same volume and intensity in the weight room and then also add in sprinting. That's a recipe for disaster for most folks. So if we're going to think, what is like the minimum? And we kind of had a little bit of a texting thread going back and forth on this. What's kind of like the minimum dosage people need to consider getting themselves to just maintain kind of that muscle hypertrophy and some of the strength while they bring the sprinting back in and maybe make that more of a focus? Because we don't want to just like totally forget all that other stuff. Like that stuff's super important. We don't want you to go lose like 30 pounds and get super weak. We want to maintain those factors. So in your mind, what's kind of a minimum effective dose with regards to how often do I need to be hitting things from a maintenance standpoint?
Yeah, I forgot to pull up these studies. I know they're out there. There's definitely some research on this stuff. And there's a paper that I know that they went down to like literally 1/9 of the volume that they were doing previously, and people didn't really lose strength or hypertrophy. What I would expect to see if you went that low is that you're probably going to see a kind of a deflation effect, like where you're going to have some of this sarcoplasmic volume is probably going to decrease a little bit because you're just not driving as much glycogen and subsequent fluid into the tissue. So you're probably going to be smaller in that sense, but that's transient. That's going to come back pretty quickly as soon as you start to reintroduce some of that training volume. But as far as like myofibrillar proteins go, like I think you're going to be able to maintain those, and I think you can figure that out fairly easily by just doing some level of resistance training and just making sure that you're not getting weaker. If you're not getting weaker, then you're probably still holding on to that myofibrillar density. And, you might not be able to handle the same workload as far as repeated efforts go, but that again, to me, has probably more to do with some of those like enzymes and substrate availability that you get as an adaptation from higher volume training. So that's again transient. I think you can bring that back right away. So I actually really like the idea of having these maintenance phases anyway for hypertrophy or for strength, because at some point you kind of, I think it's probably mostly psychological at some point, but you can make an argument that maybe there's some type of physiological desensitization thing going on, which has not really been proven yet, but there's something going on there. And I think at the very least, you're probably just going to get burnt out on it. So I think it's a good idea anyway to just chill out a little bit on some of those structural adaptations. And then maybe you just focus on, maybe that's your way of still getting your fix in terms of exercise. And then a lot of the people that we do work with are interested in all of these different modalities anyway. So you might as well just kind of divide and conquer at that point, like put your effort into the thing that you're trying to build up and then just maintain on the other stuff. So to actually give like a number, man, I would just be looking at like maybe 3 to 6 sets per body part per week. I think that's very reasonable to think that you can maintain tissue. I can tell you, that's what I'm doing right now personally. Well, it's a little bit higher than that. It's like maybe 5 to 8 to 10 on certain body parts, and that's in a caloric deficit. And I definitely seem to be maintaining tissue, and I know that not just because I look at myself in the mirror every chance that I get, but also because I'm still moving pretty similar loads to what I was before, especially on the exercises that aren't as dependent on my viscera, essentially, and just the amount of like extra gas that I have there. Not actually gas. That's not really the right word that I was looking for, but there is extra gas though, actually, especially if I'm eating more FODMAPs, not pooping as much. So it has to go somewhere. But just you have that, like that canister when you're a little fatter. And so it's a lot of times those numbers get skewed, like your squat, bench, and deadlift, your big lifts, they're going to go down, most likely just because of that and just overall body weight, just not having as much mass in general. But if you're looking at like your lat pull downs and your tricep extensions and your leg extensions, that type of stuff, like that's a pretty good proxy that if you're maintaining on those lifts and potentially even going up, that you're doing just fine. You're probably not losing muscle mass. And if you are losing muscle mass, it's probably not actual tissue, myofibrillar tissue. And that's what we would be concerned with. And, I don't know if I've definitely heard some theorize that it can be potentially better to actually lose some of that volume for certain things, like the muscle volume for certain things. I've heard it more in the context of like throwers, and that you're changing the pennation angle of some of these muscles, and that may be advantageous for producing speed as well. That's not something that I'm well versed in, but just a thought if anyone was interested in looking into that stuff. So yeah, I think that would be my kind of recommendation. Be like, yeah, maybe you can cut your weight training down to like 2 to 3 days a week, and you end up doing like 3 good sets. Make sure that they're good, high quality sets. I would probably avoid, I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on this, but I probably wouldn't want to do a ton of stuff. You want to do enough stuff to maintain the tissue quality and a little bit of stress, and those like lengthened positions of the hamstring, like RDLs and 45-degree hip extensions, but you probably don't want to push those like super far in terms of the RPE. Like, I don't think you want to be rolling into those sprint sessions with like really sore proximal hamstrings, because it's probably going to alter your movement, and you're going to get into you just have more. You already have stressed those tissues, but you probably maybe like preceding going into a sprinting phase, maybe you do want to do a lot of that. Maybe that's one way that you can actually start to build some resilience in those tissues for those inevitable reps that get a little bit shitty when you're doing your sprint work. But I would think that during a sprinting phase, you probably would want to be very careful about the RPE on those types of exercises and think of that as very much maintenance from the perspective of like effort and on top of volume as well. Like you probably wouldn't want to go very high on volume. But yeah, otherwise, like I think you'd want to just maintain your output as well as you can and not really worry so much about the amount of volume that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's super, super useful. Like 3 to 6 sets per body part per week.
Place to start.
And make sure that they're good sets too. And I think the distinction between like a knee extension versus like a big squat, it's like we know the squat has a large learning component to it. There's a large like CNS component there. And so like that will come back really quickly if you maintain the tissue, like a local quad strength, for example. Like that squat's going to come back fast. You know, I think personally, this is another great place to get people more onto machines if you can, just because it's a less wear and tear on the joints, right? Like hitting a heavy barbell back squat, a heavy straight bar deadlift, like that just, it's taxing. It comes with, like, they're great lifts, don't get me wrong, but again, it's like if I could get them on a hack squat or a pendulum squat, that makes way more sense. Like way less wear and tear. Like the hips are going to feel better, the knees are going to feel better. It allows us to prioritize this other thing better. But that was super useful. And it doesn't
get you locked down as much too. I think like you guys were talking about, like you're trying to actually now reintroduce some rotation into the system. So if you're doing more of those bilateral big lifts, you're probably going to be restricting, not that it's like you do a bench press and now you can't rotate for 6 weeks, but it's like you might as well put yourself into something like a pendulum or a hack squat where you can, you know, maybe keep a little bit of a posterior tilt. So you're not going into that place where you have to extend to stabilize the load. It just makes it a lot easier to get back into your sprint training, I would imagine.
Yeah. To that point, last summer, me and my buddy in the gym here, we were getting into a pretty like sprint heavy program, and, you know, we still wanted to keep like good pump afterwards. And the big bilateral heavy barbell lifts were smoking us, where, like, to your point about like just your extensor tone on your backside, just like you almost felt like you couldn't rotate as much. So we swapped it all out for like, you know, 45-degree extensions, a pendulum, and just like a lot of unilateral upper body and just like leg extension, leg curl, and felt like we could handle the sprint volume so much better. And that could be us, but to your point, I think there's something to be said for getting some more machine work when you're definitely up in the sprint volume.
Yeah, I think that's enormously true when we're thinking about people that are going to be 25, 30, 35, 40 plus years old. Like that's who we're talking to here. Like I'm not talking to a 16-year-old kid in high school and it's like, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You're probably going to be okay. Like we're talking to people that are 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 years old. And so, yeah, like we got to figure out how to manage these things appropriately, right? Let me share my screen here real quick so we can just like super quick hit on some volume recommendations for folks, because I got to jump off here in like 2 to 3 minutes. I want to make sure that we at least touch on this before we run, even though I feel like we probably could jam on this for like another 45 minutes. I think that like volume and like the minimum volume stuff I thought was super interesting. Probably do a whole episode on that. Okay, dope. So this is a paper from, I'll let you guys know. Do you guys think this is Haugen? What's our bet here?
Hoagie.
I would say Haugen.
Wow. Okay, either way. I'm
hungry. I see hoagie.
So the title of the paper, it's a review article from, I'm going to go Hogan et al. Sports Medicine, 2019, The Training and Development of Elite Sprint Performance and Integration of Scientific and Best Practice Literature. So this is a really good paper for people that want to maybe read up a little bit of this on their own. But they have a table in here that is tremendously useful on page 7, table 2, where it's just a quick summary of best practices for sprint training recommendations with regards to volume, intensity, and things in that realm. And so we've talked a lot about, accelerations, resisted sprints. We haven't talked about tempos at all. But I think that when you're sitting there trying to do this for yourself, this would be a really useful place to start. Again, we record these. If you're listening to this and you're like, James, what are you talking about? I'm sharing my screen. We record these. You can watch it on YouTube because it gives you the recommended distance, the intensity, the recovery time, total session volume, which is hugely important for you to be able to keep a track of. Time to next high intensive session. So like, what's the recovery time gonna look like on this for you? And then like the footwear stuff is inevitable, right? Or just not that important here. So I think the big thing to draw people's attention to is just coming in and actually looking at, okay, if I'm going to do some acceleration work, here's like the distance recommendation. Just look at the total volume session. That's really the biggest thing I want people to pull from this graph or this table. So I would take this and I would probably not only go to the absolute lowest number, but I would probably cut that in half to start. Because you got to think this is in highly trained sprinters. So you're seeing sprint volume recommendations for highly trained sprinters, which I'm guessing you are not. So go to, like, for example, if we come to acceleration work, right? Say that we want to do falling starts or push-up starts, whatever it's going to be, and we're going to go 10 yards. Well, the total session volume, their recommendation is 100 to 300 meters, right? So if we're doing 10 yards, that's 10 total sets will get me to 100 meters. I would probably cut that in half and start you at 5 sets of 10 yards. Start slow. Play the long game with this. So again, if you're thinking how much, come look at the total volume, go to the very lowest recommendation. I'd probably cut it in half. Start there. See how you respond, and then add more over time. You can continue to cook the chicken longer. To Kieran's example. Once it's cooked, not a whole lot you can do. But I found that this table is really useful when trying to figure out the whole programming side, like how much should I be doing?
We use that when building a lot of the programs, that exact table. And I'm in agreement with you as far as cutting it, because your average person that we're talking to or who's listening is probably doing other things within a session that are not just sprint based.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, dudes, I hate to run on this so quick because this has been a really good combo. But I got to run real fast here because I got another thing happening at 11. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope that you guys, girls, everyone found it useful, found it helpful. If you have questions, like pop on over, chat with us on Instagram. You can email us. Would love to, got a burp there. Would love to help out any way we can. But have a beautiful week. And yeah, we'll be back soon. We'll figure out whatever topic is going to come next. I'm not entirely sure right now. I've got a list of potentials, so I'll probably ping those out to the dudes and see where your all's heads are at. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, folks. Have a beautiful week.